The Soul's Rebellion. Carl Jung and the Neurosis of Meaninglessness. In an era where depression is broadly understood as a biochemical phenomenon, fueled by neurochemical imbalances and triggered by external factors like unrelenting stress, trauma, or simple exhaustion, a far deeper, more spiritual layer often goes entirely unnoticed. And it is precisely here that Carl Gustav Jung's profound perspective begins. Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, proposed something bold, something radical, that many of the conditions we now reflexively label as depression are not primarily failures of the organism, but urgent signs of the soul. They are not diseases that must be instantly cured or silenced, but messages that desperately need to be heard. He referred to this paralyzing phenomenon as the neurosis of meaninglessness, an emotional and spiritual collapse that doesn't arise from a damaged mind, but from a life brutally disconnected from its essential truth. People who live for decades following someone else's goals, pursuing imposed values, bowing to relentless social obligations, and playing inherited roles eventually reach a critical point where something deep inside them simply stops. There is no vital energy, no enthusiasm, no desire. And contrary to what many in the modern world think, this is not a defect. It is a refusal. The psyche is actively rejecting an existence that does not correspond to its personal myth, the unique, symbolic narrative that Jung believed each individual is destined to live. This is an uncomfortable, confronting idea because it forces an immediate re-evaluation of one's entire life. Professional success? Check. Stable relationships? Check. A perfectly well-planned routine? Check. All of this may be externally perfectly in order, and yet the soul may be in mourning. Because living someone else's myth, even executing it with relentless competence, is to die inside every single day. The body responds with chronic exhaustion, spiritual apathy, and deep discouragement. Not because it is broken, but because it is trying to protect the little core of truth that still remains deep inside. Jung observed that in the first half of life, society rigorously teaches us to seek external recognition, stability, and image. But there comes a moment, often subtle, silently creeping, and profoundly cruel, when the unconscious demands an entirely different path, the path of individuation. This is a profound, non-linear process of alignment with the true self, where the person is compelled to shed the limiting masks and courageously face who they really are. And when this powerful call is ignored, the consequence arrives disguised as depression. But what is truly dying, in fact, is merely the persona, the false social self constructed layer by layer to please the world. This video is an uncompromising invitation to look at depression with new, unconditioned eyes, not as a life sentence, but as a crucial symptom of a deep course deviation, a legitimate spiritual manifestation of the soul saying, "You are living the wrong life." The empty success and the weight of the persona. The greatest tragedy of modern life is not external failure, it is empty success. It is tirelessly reaching the very top of a towering ladder and realizing with a chilling certainty that it was relentlessly leaning against the wrong wall. This profound emptiness, often disguised by tangible achievements, financial stability, and public recognition, is one of the deepest triggers of what we call existential depression, a state Jung saw not as a chemical dysfunction, but as a truthful reflection of the disconnection between the social ego and the deep self. For much of our lives, we are rigorously shaped to fit in. From our earliest childhood, we are programmed to meet the rigid expectations of parents, school, culture, and demanding society. This relentless programming creates what Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted and to function. There is nothing inherently wrong with this mask. It is sociologically necessary. But the profound problem arises when we completely confuse this mask with who we actually are. When we spend decades cultivating an identity built primarily to please others, to fit smoothly into mechanical systems, to fulfill roles we did not consciously, authentically choose, the devastating result is a life that is perfectly functional on the outside and absolutely desolate on the inside. This is the central stage for the personal myth. For Jung, every single human being carries within them a unique narrative, a symbolic, necessary journey that needs to be lived out for there to be any true sense of fulfillment. This story is not dictated by self-help manuals, nor by ready-made cultural formulas. It reveals itself in spontaneous, often inconvenient passions, in ignored talents, in repressed, inconvenient desires, and in the symbolic dreams that repeat night after night. When we ignore this powerful internal call and choose instead to follow someone else's myth, the predictable path expected by parents, the shallow model idealized by society, the safe script of another's life, the self begins to react. First with subtle, nagging restlessness, then with an acute personal crisis, and finally with a complete collapse. This collapse is what many desperately try to medically label as depression. But it is not necessarily a chemical collapse. It is a symbolic collapse, a deep disconnection from vital, life-giving energy that occurs when the soul no longer sees any meaning in the theatrical roles being staged. The individual begins to feel that despite being surrounded by everything that should logically bring satisfaction, life has lost its color, its rhythm, its essential purpose. Waking up becomes a crushing burden, work a dull, mechanical obligation. Relating becomes a superficial, mechanical act, not because they are broken, but because they are absent from themselves. This disconnection is dangerous precisely because it is so silent, so insidious. It does not explode, it dissolves. And the more the person tries to compensate with more external achievements or superficial self-help, the deeper the underlying existential hole becomes. It is a vicious, consuming cycle that endlessly feeds the false self while brutally suffocating the true one. The soul's protest, symptoms, as language. Not all pain is just senseless noise. Some pain is a language, a deliberate form of communication. According to Jung, many symptoms that are quickly labeled as depressive today are, in fact, highly sophisticated ways for the unconscious to try to make itself heard. When a person begins to radically distance themselves from their personal myth, their deepest, most authentic truth, the self reacts with a powerful, necessary protest. This protest is not a pathological breakdown, but a legitimate existential resistance of the soul. This resistance rarely presents itself as a clear cry. It arrives disguised in the form of apathy, chronic exhaustion, and a paralyzing loss of interest in everything that was once significant. The days seem mechanical, social interactions feel superficial, and a profound existential fatigue completely takes over the person. This is not physical fatigue, it is an exhaustion of the soul, a sign that the entire being is resisting the act of living a story that is simply not theirs. Jung believed that when the ego, our everyday consciousness, comes into acute conflict with the self, our deepest, authentic psychic core, the vital energy that should flow naturally becomes fragmented. It is as if a core part of us is emphatically saying no to the life we are trying to lead. And in that no, symptoms arise, not as a failure of the body, but as symbolic resistance. These symptoms are not limited to the emotional. They manifest profoundly in the body, in disturbed sleep, in lost appetite, in libido, and most crucially, in creativity. Everything that once flowed begins to feel stuck. Everything that once sparked curiosity now generates indifferent numbness. And the most distressing part is that often there is no clear external reason. The person looks around and lacks nothing, but inside everything feels utterly absent. Jung saw these states as liminal moments, powerful doors to a deep psychic transition. They arise when something essential in us needs to die so that something unprecedented can be born. But out of fear, repression, or conditioned social panic, we try to instantly silence these vital signals with distractions, excessive medication, or superficial forced positivity. We ignore the symptom, refusing to listen to what it is fundamentally trying to communicate. This act of deep listening is essential, for when the self protests, it is fiercely pointing to a truth that needs to emerge. It may be a talent that has been brutally buried, a vocation that was abandoned, a life choice made out of paralyzing fear, not profound authenticity. The symptom is the clue. The pain is the map. The way out is not to erase these signals, but to courageously understand them. From the moment the individual recognizes that their pain can be a form of wisdom, a cry for reconnection with their true nature, the possibility for real, irreversible transformation begins. The path of integration, individuation, and the shadow. At the core of Jung's psychology is an idea that sounds almost heretical. Suffering can be a call to a profound journey that seeks not merely to repair what is broken, but to reveal what is deeply hidden. This necessary journey is the process of individuation. Individuation is not synonymous with individualism. Individualism seeks to separate, affirm the ego, and compete. Individuation proposes the exact opposite: integration. It is the inner movement of consciously reconnecting with all parts of oneself, the light and the dark, reason and instinct, desire and vocation. Jung asserted that in the first half of life, the ego must develop, carve out space in the world, and form a coherent identity. But there comes a critical, unavoidable point, often violently marked by crisis, where this is no longer sufficient. What once worked begins to feel overwhelmingly heavy. What once gave meaning now only numbs. This is where the call of individuation begins. It arises as an insistent, internal restlessness that cannot be silenced. It demands a reconnection with the self, the organizing center of the psyche, the totality of being that knows, intuitively, what we came here to do. Confronting the shadow, a central, terrifying step in this process, is the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is the part of the personality that the conscious ego has vigorously repressed and denied. The primitive instincts, the unacceptable desires, the shame, and the flaws. When a person avoids individuation, the shadow is often projected onto others or onto the world, leading to external conflict and internal moralizing. Individuation demands that we recall these projections and face the shadow within. This is not about becoming good. It is about becoming whole. Until you integrate the shadow, it retains immense power over you, sabotaging your efforts toward authenticity. Confronting the shadow is a painful, necessary act of integrity, a realization that you are not only the light you wish to be, but also the darkness you refuse to see. Individuating is to accept this immense call. It is to commit to a process of inner excavation, where old, rigid structures must crumble for something new and vital to emerge. It is to die to the idealized images we create of ourselves, and to be reborn in the raw, unstable, and ultimately powerful truth of what we actually are. This process is not comfortable. It is not quick. It cannot be resolved with simple motivational phrases. It is a confrontation with everything the ego fears losing. And yet, it is the only path to rediscover the lost vitality, the silent enthusiasm, and the feeling of living something that truly, organically makes sense. Deciphering the internal oracle, listening to the unconscious. In Jung's revolutionary thinking, the unconscious is not just a dusty reservoir of forgotten memories. It is a guide, an internal oracle that speaks in the language of symbols and images, knowing precisely the soul's unique path. When life loses its meaning, it is not the logical mind that can offer the answer. It is the unconscious that holds the vital map for reconnecting with purpose. And listening to it requires a radical change of attitude, stepping out of control and entering into listening. Jung believed that the personal myth is revealed through symbolic fragments. Recurring dreams. They are not random absurdities. They are coded compensatory messages. If waking life is pulling you violently away from the self, the dreams will relentlessly try to pull you back. Paying attention to dream symbols and reflecting on your strangest emotions is part of this essential listening. Creative impulses. Many individuals in crisis report a sudden, inconvenient urge to draw, write poetry, take up an instrument, or move to a new, strange city. These impulses should never be dismissed as mere escapes. They are often the first, bold manifestations of the personal myth trying to express itself after decades of repression. Abandoned talents. Those things that made sense in your adolescence or early adulthood, but were set aside in the name of obligations. Resuming that lost thread can be the profound key to reclaiming your soul's energy. Active imagination. Jung's specific technique involves entering a waking dream state, a focused meditation, and allowing symbolic images, characters, landscapes, feelings to emerge and develop spontaneously. By engaging with these inner figures, you initiate a dialogue with the unconscious, forcing the light of the ego to meet the symbols of the self. This is the transcendent function at work, the psychic mechanism that creates a new, reconciling solution from the tension of opposites. Listening to the unconscious is the beginning of reconnecting with purpose. It does not demand immediate, ready-made answers. It demands a profound willingness to listen to deep questions. What in me is trying to be born? What vital part of me was sacrificed to please others? What kind of suffering would I be willing to fight for because it brings me meaning? The simple, brave act of formulating these questions begins to dissolve the rigidity of the ego. Consciousness opens, and the unconscious, realizing it is finally being listened to, begins to collaborate. Meaning begins to emerge, not as a sudden explosion of euphoria, but as an internal, steady ember that refuses to be extinguished. The phoenix reborn. From suffering to sovereignty. Most people view depression as an irreversible end, the end of energy, motivation, and hope. But for Jung, this dark experience can mark the absolute beginning of something deeply necessary, a process of psychological rebirth. This rebirth demands awareness, deep listening, and above all, a willingness to traverse the darkness with unflinching honesty. Because before the self can be reborn, the false self, the persona, must die. Depression, in this context, can be seen as an archetypal descent into the underground of the soul, catabasis. It is a journey where, just as Orpheus descends to the underworld, the individual must face the psychic territory where nothing superficial survives. It is a moment of extreme vulnerability. The person feels they have lost all external references. The old life no longer makes sense, but the new one has not yet fully begun. They are standing precisely on the threshold. This intermediate state is dangerous, but immensely fertile, because it is here that the alchemy of the soul occurs, the transformation of raw, meaningless suffering into profound, durable meaning. The transformation requires that the pain not be denied or immediately anesthetized. One must endure the tension, the emptiness, the feeling of disorientation, without trying to escape through quick, superficial solutions. Because it is precisely at the center of this discomfort that the possibility of finding the lost thread of purpose resides. As many go through this process, they report a curious shift. The sadness remains, but it gains dignity. The suffering does not vanish, but it becomes understandable, directed. It is no longer a bottomless pit, but a path with a clear direction. It is the difference between sinking and consciously diving. When this descent is recognized as part of a necessary journey and not as a mistake to be corrected, the very narrative of life begins to reorganize itself. The scar becomes a powerful symbol of having crossed over, and vitality slowly returns, not as artificial euphoria, but as a constant, silent, and steady flame, living from the self. Integrity over happiness. Reaching the other side of existential pain is not about emerging as a perfect or fully enlightened person. It is about becoming your true self, someone who has stopped fleeing from themselves, someone who, even while still carrying doubts, traumas, and scars, has decided to live with psychological integrity. This is the essence of living with purpose. Living from the self is not a mystical or unattainable experience. It is a daily practice. It is made up of small, deliberate choices fiercely aligned with the personal myth. It is understanding that there are things only you can do in the way that you do them, and that your existence is justified not by external applause, but by an internal coherence that needs no explanation to anyone. This might mean changing careers, yes, but it may also mean simply changing your attitude in your current career. It may mean finally reclaiming a talent you abandoned at age 15, or admitting that the restlessness that has pursued you for years is not madness, it is a suffocated vocation. Carl Jung reminds us that there is no universal model for this. The process of individuation is radically individual. What is destiny for one may be a detrimental detour for another. Therefore, there is no generic map. There is only listening. And fidelity to this path requires, above all, the courage to be unpopular, to be misunderstood, and at times, to be lonely. Because the price of living your own truth is often the necessary rupture with others' expectations. But what you gain is infinitely more valuable. Integrity, vitality, and a sense of presence that no distraction can offer. A deep, almost sacred feeling that you are finally, consciously, where you should be. Not because it is easy, but because it is right. Living with meaning is not about being happy all the time. It is about knowing that your pain has a place, your joy has roots, and your existence has a direction. It is being able to look at life, even on the darkest days, and feel that it matters, that you matter, and that what you do is aligned with something greater than your own ego. This is the true healing that Jung proposes. Not the superficial suppression of symptoms, but the profound integration of your being. Not the blind adaptation to society, but fierce fidelity to your own soul. In closing, we leave you with a direct, firm, and necessary final call. You are not lost, you are simply disconnected. And there is still time to remember who you truly are. The only true crisis is the one you refuse to listen to.